Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Alan McCrow and I'm the chair of the committee. The other members of the committee present are Councillors Jeremy Cottam, Paul Kander, Jeff Mays, Justin Pemberton, Tom McCann and Clive Taylor. The following officers are attending to advise and support the meeting. Simon Till, Team Manager, Development Management, Michael Butler, Principal Planning Officer, Claire Say, Principal Lawyer, Paul Goddard, Hideways Development Control Team, Development Control Team, Thomas Radbourne, who's our clerk, and Sam Chiverton, who's our Zoom host this evening. Before we start this evening, I'd like to take the opportunity to remind members we're subject to the Council's Code of Conduct, which requires us to uphold certain standards, including, importantly, respect. Members across the chamber may not always agree with one another, but would ask that in our disagreements, we endeavour to always be respectful of others' views. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route and follow any instructions given by the officers. The assembly point is the car park of the Dolphin Pub. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it's safe to proceed. Do members have any questions about procedures this evening? Thank you. First of all, item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies, Chairman. That work? Yes, we have apologies received from Councillors Richard Somner, Ross McKinnon and Vicky Poole, with Tom McCann as a substitute.
Thank you. Item 2, do we have any declarations of interest, please, for items on the agenda this evening? Okay. Thank you very much. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. I hope members have all read the minutes. Are there any issues of accuracy, please? In that case, could I have a proposer that we adopt them? Councillor Cottam, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Pemberton, thank you very much. Could I have everybody in favour of adopting the minutes, please show? That's everybody, thank you. So the minutes have been approved and I will now sign the minutes. Thank you. So move on to item 4 and the first planning application. But before that, I'll just run through the procedure this evening. Officers will present the application to the committee, after which the following groups might wish to make representations for a maximum of 5 minutes each. Parish or town council representatives, objectors, supporters, the applicant and/or agent, and finally ward members. The committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the speakers, and then members will have the opportunity to ask questions of officers, and members of the public and speakers will not be able to engage with the committee members or officers outside of this process, either by calling out from the audience, sending any form of electronic message, email, text or WhatsApp. Yeah. So could I ask Michael Butler, please, to introduce application 24/02051, James Farm, Burfield.
Thank you, Chairman. Can everyone hear me all right? I've got a cold, I'm afraid, but hopefully you'll hear me. This is a retrospective application for commercial storage containers for business and domestic use. The applicant is Now Storage. The reason it's committee is because the application was called to committee by the ward member, given I understand the concerns of the Wakefield Parish Council. And the officer recommendation is to approve the application. If you look at the site plan, the red line, that is the site plan for those of you who came to the site visit last week. Just for clarity for members' understanding, obviously the red line in the access is the application site. The land immediately to the east of the red line, but within the blue line, is already permitted storage containers. And then the land outside the application site is James's farm, which is a significant mix of industrial and commercial uses. And there is a mix of residential uses adjacent to James Lane further to the east. Turning to page 14 of the agenda, just for clarification by way of introduction. This is retrospective. The land was formerly agricultural. It lies in the countryside in policy terms. The application is for 182 storage units, 144 metal containers, 145 are for personal use and 34 are rented for business apparently. And the remaining, because that doesn't add up, are vacant, I understand. The storage containers are mostly painted olive green and are no higher than 2.6 metres in height. You'll see from the block plan how they're organised on site so that internal access by vehicle can be accommodated. And well, before I go through the rest of the slides, I'll just carry on with the presentation. Turning to page 16, there are no listed buildings for members to be concerned with. There are no conservation areas. The thing that members must take into account, they're obliged to take into account, or we're recommending that they take into account in determining this application, is that it lies in the DEPZ for AWB site, which lies 500 metres to the north. That is the AWE Burfield site. And this is an important constraint identified under your local plan policy SP4. So in terms of consultations, Wakefield are strongly objecting. Highways, however, have no objections on traffic grounds. Environmental health have no objections. The AWE, however, who speak on behalf of clearly the AWE site, are objecting, and the reasons for their objections are set out in the agenda report. Simon and I are happy to answer any questions on that. I think particularly Simon is the expert on that. However, our council emergency planning officer, and as those of you who don't know, the council is the statutory body which is responsible for the off-site emergency plan in case there is an incident at the AWE. She has, after much negotiation with the applicants, determined that by condition, which you'll see on the agenda, if it's approved, the application is acceptable in case there's an incident at the AWE. And accordingly, the ONR, who are the Office of Nuclear Regulation, do not advise against the application, i.e. consistent with the emergency planning officer. In terms of appraisal, I won't go through any great detail because I'm sure you've all read the report. But in terms of principle, the favourable recommendation is relatively balanced in the sense that the site was originally Greenfield, it's in the countryside, and before this application, although there have been permissions, you'll see from the planning history, there was no lawful implementation of those permissions. And given that, there is no extant commercial use on the site at present. There may be after tonight, of course. So that members do need to take that into account, and that is set out particularly in paragraph 6.2 of the agenda. However, just to stress that policy DM35 in the local plan review does allow for new employment development in the countryside where this benefits the rural economy. And on balance, given the location and nature of the uses and of course the demand for the uses, the commercial demand, officers consider that on balance, this complies with the advice in DM 35, excuse me. In terms of character and appearance, I'll just scroll through the presentation. For those of you who couldn't make the site visit, this is the access looking east. This is internally part of the site looking, I believe it's north. I think this is west, but again, you get the idea. This is inside the site and what it appears like. This is certainly looking north. And again, the access looking northeast. Within the site itself, you see one of the CCTV and lighting poles there. And again, within the site looking west. So it's a very tidy site. There's no question about that. And it is surrounded by mature vegetation. And it is also surrounded by existing bunds, landscape bunds, which assist in its screening. So basically, in terms of character appearance, paragraph 6.7, we consider that the application site is very well screened, and therefore it's acceptable in terms of overall visual impact. I do stress, however, that just because something is well screened doesn't automatically make it successful or acceptable. But in this case, we consider there is no visual harm per se. In terms of residential amenity, I'll just come back to the block plan on the location plan on the screen there. The nearest residents are about at least 150 metres, possibly 200 metres to the east. And it's noticeable that the planning authority has not received any objections to this application from any local people in terms of noise. We have consulted our environmental health colleagues, and they are content that so long as conditions are applied, the application will be acceptable in terms of policy DM5 in the LPR. And no, not finally, but coming on to highways, the highways officer has accepted the application in terms of traffic generation. We have accepted that there will be, if this application is approved, no more than 12 vehicle movements daily. What I mean by that is actually 24 movements, but 12 people attending the site on average. Clearly on some days it would be more, possibly Saturdays and Sundays, but overall that is the general traffic generation. But Mr. Goddard is able to answer any questions on that. And so I'm not going to say the principal issue, but it's obviously an important issue, the DEPZ and the AWE issue. I've been through that in a bit of detail regarding the consultations we've received. Because our emergency planning officer is satisfied with the application, so long as by condition a new safety unit, which is on the screen here, is located at the site entrance. So this is a safety unit for people who may be on the site, suitable for 48 hours if there is an emergency incident at Burfield to the north. And that will be provided on site by condition if it's approved. So in terms of the planning balance and conclusion, we consider as officers that essentially it complies with policy. It will meet an ongoing public and commercial demand for accessible storage facilities. And there are no technical objections from highways, environmental health, nor indeed from the emergency planning officer. So officers are recommending approval with conditions. However, can I just draw your attention to the update report? The applicant requested that the operating hours are consistent with the site to the east. We considered this, and having consulted the environmental health officer, we are content that the condition below, as on the update sheet, is applied. I'll read it out because obviously on the update there's new information. So it will read clearly, if you agree with it, the use hereby permitted shall not be open to customers outside the hours of 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock on any day. The movement and maintenance of containers shall not be carried out outside the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturdays, and at no time on Sundays and bank holidays, because clearly movement and maintenance of containers can be noisy. We are also recommending an additional condition that at no time in the future shall no more than 30% of the storage units, i.e. maximum of 55, be used for commercial tenants on the site. And that is because we wish to constrain any untoward traffic generation from the site. So we're recommending that to you. Otherwise, it's conditional permission, Chairman.
Thank you. So now I'd like to move on to the speakers on this application. So first of all, the adjacent parish council, Wakefield. Could Jim Thompson come to the rostrum, please? Is he present?
He's online. He's just rejoining as a panel.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Stop sharing.
Huh?
Mr. Thompson, there you are. Thank you. Mr. Thompson, you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Okay, thank you. I prepared a statement I'll read from rather than ad-libbing it.
Would you like a warning when you're getting, say, to 4 minutes?
Okay, thank you. Our detailed objections are lodged against the application, so I'll be brief. But a bit of history first. There is a history of disregard of planning process on this complex dating back to the 90s. What is now regarded as brownfield was originally agricultural land, rendered brownfield through illegal tipping of builders' rubble. Enforcement action in the 90s required its restoration. This was apparently achieved by laying topsoil over rubble, which it would seem hasn't actually restored it to a greenfield site. However, turning to the present, today's objection draws on planning history going back to 2014. Wakefield gave qualified support to a 2014 application for just 20 containers plus caravan storage on the adjacent site. Residents' concerns about Sunday operation were ignored. However, the decision notice for that application stated, the maximum number of containers, i.e. 20, is stipulated to prevent an unsustainable scale of development in this relatively remote rural location. And also said, operation from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. was stipulated, quote, to safeguard the amenities of surrounding occupiers. When the limit of 20 was significantly exceeded sometime in the past, a nearby resident complained to West Berks, whose intervention spawned the recent round of planning applications. A July 2024 application sought to increase the originally approved 20 containers to 83 within the curtilage of the 2014 application, and that's the site that's to the east or right as we looked at the map. Retrospective permission was granted for no more than 83 containers. The approval note stated the maximum numbers of containers is stipulated to prevent an unsustainable scale of development in this relatively remote rural location. However, the number of containers on site was already well in excess of 83. As September 24, this application sought permission for a further, I think, 144 containers on the contiguous adjacent land, which is under discussion now, but outside the curtilage of the previous application. While separate from the earlier July application, we maintain that since it shares the same access, then it also constitutes an unsustainable scale of development in this relatively remote rural location, to quote again the July 2024 approval. In addition, both 2024 applications seeks to extend access to 10 p.m. from 7 p.m. 7 days per week. And to reiterate the original 2014 application, which specified 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., this was to safeguard the amenities of surrounding occupiers. Both the 2024 applications dismiss disregard for local residents with the phrase, "There are no sensitive receptors nearby." Further, the site is already advertising 24/7 operation on a roadside sign on James Lane in contravention of the approved applications. And that essentially sums up the nature of our residents' objections. One thing I would also add, it is correct that on this application there are no objections from residents, but there were objections to the earlier 2024 application, and I think it's reasonable to assume that the people who objected then would have the same objections because it involved the same site. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions, please, for the councillor, parish councillor? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got to call the applicants and the agent, please, to the rostrum. Guy Drummond, Mark Drummond and Roger Prescott, please. If all of you join at the rostrum, and if we have any questions, then you all would be able to answer the questions. But
Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
There's only you to speak, is there?
Only me to speak at the moment, yes, indeed.
So again, you have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning towards the end?
Yes, please. I hope you won't need to call on me to do that, but still.
And sorry, when you finish, could you remain there for any questions, please?
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Roger Prescott of Bourne Valley Associates, the planning agents for Now Storage. Also here are Guy Drummond and Mark Drummond of Now Storage and my colleague Andrew Watton, who will all be very happy to answer questions. We'd like to thank Michael Butler, lastly the case officer, and Carolyn Richardson, the emergency planning officer, for their assistance and clear communication. We're pleased, of course, that the recommendation is to approve the proposal. It's a retrospective application, as we've heard, but there have been no complaints raised against the activities on this site or against the established adjacent site modified by permission, as we've just heard, in 2024. We note the officer's report concludes greatest weight is accorded to the contribution of the development to the local economy, which outweighs the small degree of harm. He's right to recognise how local businesses, especially those starting work and business, benefit from the storage facilities the site provides. There is, of course, indeed little harm caused, with no material impact on amenity and with the development on unallocated land, yes, being well screened and with no environmental disbenefits. Members will have noted how neat and well managed the site is, as are all the 17 Now Storage sites. We're pleased to learn from the update sheet that officers are content to apply the same hours of operation condition to this site as the eastern part of the site, which already has full permission. And Mr. Butler addressed that to you. Turning to the potential condition, you will recall that at the committee site meeting, a comment was raised that because of the business use of containers might generate more traffic than personal use, a limit should be placed on the number of or proportion of units that could be used by businesses as opposed to domestic customers. We now note that officers recommend that a limit of 30% of containers for business use should be applied. Although no such conditions have been applied to any planning permissions for the other Now Storage sites, the company reluctantly accepts the limitation. This acceptance is in the spirit of cooperation with officers and our desire to work in concert with local councillors to maintain high levels of amenity. That's all, Chair. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Do members have any questions, please, for the agent? Councillor Taylor.
Could you advise on how many jobs are created by the by these additional units that we would be, you know, if we do go ahead and approve, would receive planning permission today?
Mark Drummond of Now Storage is going to address that.
I mean, I don't have any specific numbers exactly around that, but yeah, we do support lots of, you know, businesses with those units. You know, typically people, you know, living and working locally. Yeah.
Just to see clarify, I mean, presumably there's some people employed in handling the administration of bookings for that.
Yeah, you mean, so you're talking about the central business, yeah.
Is there any job creation arising?
Yeah, I mean, we have 12 people working in the business. That's supporting the wider business as well. But yeah, that they're obviously handling bookings and reservations for the site. Handling all the comings and goings. Yeah.
Could I remind members that questions to the speaker should be restricted to clarification of the presentation that they've made. Thank you. Jeremy, Councillor Cottam.
Thank you. Following up on the movements of vehicles, basically, do you see many movements of the actual containers themselves?
I'll start this and perhaps my colleagues can follow this up. No, we don't. The movements, once a site has been established, are those people visiting the containers and occasionally by staff to monitor the condition of the containers. But in terms of moving the containers onto the site, we recognise that's going to be potentially more disturbing. Once a site has been fully established, we don't foresee any additional movements in that respect. Perhaps my colleagues might want to say something on top of that.
Well, just going a bit further. So you're not proposing to increase the numbers, and you don't feel that you have a turnover of these containers from deterioration. I believe they're still standard 40-foot containers, so which are now being used.
Yes, that's so. In terms of movement, no, unless there is rapid deterioration, and perhaps my colleagues can comment on that, there wouldn't be any additional movements. In terms of the capacity of the site, we don't believe that any further containers could be added reasonably, perhaps one, perhaps two, to the site, but that would be about it. There's no scope for significant expansion, so please be assured about that. What about deterioration and replacement, colleagues?
Yeah, they're obviously of a steel construction containers, and the sort of the lifespan of one would be typically sort of 25 to 30 years. So all of the units on site there are on that part of the site are less than 5 years old. So
thank you.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you. Mine is on a potential condition should it be approved, so I could get some sort of understanding of how difficult it would be to monitor. One of the conditions would be 30% of no more than 30% commercial usage. I'm concerned about how you could guarantee to monitor that. Because if you don't monitor it, we have to monitor it, and therefore we have to double check your work, if you see what I'm saying. I'd need some reassurance that that's actually not too of an onerous task.
We have obviously discussed this since the genesis of the potential new condition, and we've considered what might be possible. It's not a condition which has been applied to any of the other sites. It's new. However, what Now Storage would have to do is to analyse the likely activities of each and every one of their clients, their occupants, and consider what proportion of these may well be business users. There can be best guesses. Some of these people will be sole traders, and you might not know that they're really a business use. They might appear to be domestic. We don't know. We'd have to take it at their word. But we would, the Now Storage would indeed start to go through the numbers and check them and consider how this might be applied. It is a difficult condition. We totally agree with you. We will do our best to work with members and with officers to see how this might be done in a efficient and effective way.
I think officers may be able to assist with that as well. Okay, thank you. Councillor Mays.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My question really relates to the actual layout of the road system approaching the areas which are occupied by the various containers, and some of them are larger, some are smaller.
Councillor Mays, your question should be related to the presentation that the applicant and agent has done.
Well, my question is, I don't see from the drawings here where the road alignment is for each of the areas which are fitted with containers.
Can I interject there, Chairman, if I may?
Yes.
I can understand the question, the reasoning for the question, but that might be better directed towards Paul Goddard, the Highways Officer, because in fact, in the report, I didn't go through the whole report, but it does actually state that a new submitted plan was sent in to show exactly how, I think it's 7.5 ton rigid vehicles could actually access the site.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Mays?
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
No, that's all right.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kanda.
Thank you. Just the question is not directed over there, but it's related to that, which is the site weight limit 7.5 tons?
So again, that's not a question that's related to the presentation. So perhaps perhaps you can direct that to the Highways Officer.
I can do, but do they not have a limitation themselves? As in, do they just allow anything to come in? That's kind of where I'm going with that.
Frankly, Chair, I'm not conscious that there are any such controls. However, what we have done is monitored the use of this and existing sites, and there have been there's been no use by HGVs of visiting the site and depositing or picking up goods. They generally are by cars or small vans. So there's no question of any heavy vehicles using these sites.
Okay. Any other questions from members? Okay, thank you. So we move on then to ward members. Councillor Mays, are you intended to speak as a ward member? Because if you are, they'd have to divide the time between yourselves and
Chairman, we have Councillor Carter online.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Is it my go?
Yes, it's your go. Or we can even see you.
Good evening. Hi there, Alan. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Again, you have 5 minutes, and if you could remain online so that answer any questions from members. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, fine. Thanks very much. So whilst I know that the fact this and previous applications is retrospective is not a material consideration for deciding whether to approve this particular application, the fact remains that, as Wakefield Parish Council, I think, have eloquently pointed out earlier, this area started with 24 units, grew via a retrospective application to 83, and I haven't done the total, but we're now talking about adding another 144. So possibly an irrelevant analogy here is this seems not that different in terms of order of magnitude, just to give a sort of visual image of it to what Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council are planning to do in Mortimer West End, turning a hamlet of 20 into 350. So in any event, there is a creeping death going on here. And I see actually no explanation or justification for the signing that's been mentioned here and previously that's claiming the site is open 24 hours a day. And in fact, do we know that the tenants stick to the retrospectively approved operating hours that would the case officer talked about earlier, 7 till 10 p.m. on any day, movement on Monday to Friday, 8 till 6 p.m. and 8 till 1 p.m. on a Saturday? Do we actually know that that's being adhered to? But on the timing and the opening hours, I was never happy with the hours that were proposed in the 2024 application. So in fact, the statement that was made earlier that says there was no objections is incorrect. If you look on the planning consent for the 2024 application, you'll see clearly my objection, which unfortunately for some reason that is not particularly helpful to go into was missed in the report, but it did cause me to have quite a long dialogue with my colleague, Mr. Till, on it, so we did discuss it. But the reality is I was never happy with specifically the extension past 7 p.m. on a Sunday. So I don't think, again, if I apply creeping death analogy to the timing, it's okay for this to go to 10 p.m. on a Sunday. And also the fact remains that also, separate point, section 6.3 of the DM 35, not previously developed land, concerns me. I do understand the need for commercial and personal use, but obviously I've covered about the scale here of growth. But to kiss goodbye apparently to agricultural land is not something that I think the council should do lightly. Whether or not we end up at war, we do seem to be short of agricultural land, so that should be taken and is a material consideration. And also on the terms of the no objections for residents, I think members probably should take account that although since 2023 we have been writing to local residents, and also in this case, of course, there aren't very many of them, do we actually know that they got the letter? Because I do know of somebody that didn't get a letter on another application recently and is effectively up in arms, the fact that it went through and they didn't have a chance to object. So please let's not assume that residents were aware. And also, I don't think we can assume that because the resident didn't say anything makes it okay. In my mind, that's the two don't necessarily, the two statements aren't, to the conclusion, I don't think is necessarily reliable. So, traffic up and down in a rural area on a Sunday and Wakefield's position generally on the overdevelopment in this rural location, I think proportionally that makes this highly questionable, and I hope members will take account of what they and I have said. Thank you very much.
Yeah, a question for me first. When you said you objected to the 24 application, you presumably mean the one that was improved in September 24, not the one we're discussing this evening.
Correct. Yes, I said 24, meaning. Yes, not 2024, not the quantity of 24. Yes, I have scope for confusion there. Thank you for querying that.
Okay. Do any members have any questions, please, for the local member? Councillor Cottam, Councillor McCann, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you. It doesn't take a lot of working out to work out that that's going to be quite a difficult condition, the 30%, unless there's some sort of documental evidence, unless you visit the site. I think that's going to be really quite a difficult condition to enforce.
Can I suggest you raise that with officers when we're finished with the...
Sorry, I thought...
No, we have a local member there to answer any questions.
It's questions to me, wasn't it? It was meant to be asking questions to me about what I've just said. I think that was where we're at.
Any questions? Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you.
So we move on now to questions to officers. So who would like to lead off? Councillor McCann.
My apologies, Chair. I was distracted by asking a question for some guidance. Perhaps I can ask a question in a second. I would need some reassurance that this 30% condition is actually enforceable. I need some sort of suggestion on how it's done. I think it's quite clear that that was an important condition. It's never been used before, therefore some sort of reassurance on how that's going to be done and monitored. And the other one is, there's obvious concern from residents that previous planning permissions and conditions were not enforced until effectively too late. How does this committee and the ward members get reassurance to say that these conditions will be enforced and that the previous planning conditions will be enforced and monitored and reported back? I know members can bring concerns to officers directly through ward membership, but if the committee itself is the decision-making body, how do we get reassurance that they're actually going to be, conditions are actually going to be enforced? If you see what I'm saying, Chair. Yeah?
Yes, that's.
Thank you, Chairman. I will flip those two questions over and first of all deal with the issue of the committee's relationship with planning enforcement and enforcement of conditions. It is not for the planning committee to decide not to grant planning permission due to a concern with the practicality of enforcing a condition if it is a consideration that a condition could be enforced. So to unpack that a little bit, taking the hypothetical situation that West Berkshire Council employed no planning enforcement officers, the committee would not be able to take the view that just because there was nobody to enforce a condition, the condition couldn't be enforced. So practical difficulties with enforcement of conditions are a difficult matter to address. Whether a condition can be practically enforced or whether a condition is considered enforceable are two separate matters. Now, whether a condition is enforceable is essentially, is there a route to enforce that condition? Whether a condition can be practically enforced is a matter of resources within the council. And a planning inspector would take exactly that view and wouldn't move to not apply a condition purely because it would be impractical for the local planning authority to take enforcement measures. So moving to the first question, in terms of whether a condition could be practically enforced in this case. And I note, Councillor McCann, that you've said that it's an unusual condition. In actual fact, it's a condition of quite a usual form, although you would normally see it applied to floor spaces within a building. Taking, for example, an industrial development that had an office space, then we would designate X amount of floor space to the industrial uses and Y amount of floor space to ancillary office accommodation. So in that particular respect, it's perfectly ordinary condition requirement. In terms of enforcing it, I can apply an example of a nursery school that I had to, as an enforcement officer, to monitor, which meant that I used to make regular trips out to check details on the nursery school register in terms of parents coming and going. My suggestion is quite simply that the operator make a register of the people who are using the units, and then an enforcement officer can check that register. There are also ways to check the units corresponding to what's recorded in the register, and this again is quite a normal sort of check for an enforcement officer to make. We do it all the time with agricultural buildings, for instance. Oh, I've got this, that, or the other tenant in that building. Okay, let's go down there and have a look. So while it's a difficult condition to enforce, and while as a former enforcement officer, I have great sympathy with my colleagues in planning enforcement when they have to deal with enforcement of conditions like this, it is not a condition that I would say is unreasonable or does not meet the tests of planning conditions, including enforceability. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I've got a question relating to the opening hours of this establishment, and also relating to the fact that I think a couple of people have mentioned that current signage outside the fences indicates that it's a 24-hour operation. Now, I could just add that I recently hired a storage unit. I have to say, not from the same company that's making this application today, in Reading, where the signage said it was accessible 24 hours, and I wanted to be able to access it 24 hours. I hired it and then discovered that it wasn't. I couldn't access it after 8 o'clock in the evening, which I wasn't very happy about. Could I suggest that this condition could be amended to also require that the signage accurately represents the hours that this establishment is open to customers?
Mr. Chair.
I think in respect to the signage, this is probably a matter that we need to take up with the planning enforcement officers in order that an officer can liaise with the operators of the site and ensure that any inaccurate signage is amended, because clearly there are planning conditions in relation to the existing use of the site that should be being kept to. So that is a matter that officers, I would suggest in this case, would take away to the planning enforcement officer, irrespective of the outcome of the determination tonight, because quite clearly the signage should be accurate and the site should be operating to the requirements of the existing conditions.
Thank you. Councillor Kanda.
Hi, thanks. So I've got a couple of questions. I guess, first of all, with regards to the traffic estimations, how has that worked out? Because for over 200 units, it doesn't sound like an awful lot of coming and going, potentially, particularly given if 30% of that could be commercial. So during the day, you're going to have people going back and forth for supplies and stuff.
So, Mr. Gallagher, could you?
Yes, I can, Chairman.
Please.
With this proposal, rightly or wrongly, being retrospective, some traffic surveys were undertaken of this part of James Farm, the part of the site, the applications before you. Some traffic surveys were done during June 2024. I'm assuming that with that, there would have been a percentage of business use already included in there. And the results were 8 vehicle movements a day, 4 in, 4 out. These uses, self-contained storage, some members may recall that we've had such applications at this committee before, are generally very low with regards to traffic generation. Yes, you may get some businesses who may visit more often, but most of the units, being domestic storage, would probably be visited once every few months or something. So what the applicants did, because at the time of the survey, only 78% of the site was occupied. So they've pro-rated it up as if it was 100% full. And you're looking at some 12 vehicle movements a day, 6 in, 6 out. And my advice to the committee is that is very low, but it's borne out from actual survey evidence that was taken on the site in June 2024. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, thank you. I was aware you'd already done a traffic survey, so it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
I've got another question in terms of the hours of operation of the other businesses surrounding. Are they in line with the 10 p.m? And if so, do we know how much traffic goes in and out there?
When you say the other businesses, you mean the businesses on James's farm outside the application site? I'm afraid I wouldn't know the answer to that without checking all the planning history, but I would be surprised that even on some of them, because they're long-standing authorised uses, whether they have any conditions on timing whatsoever anyway. All I can say is that if the committee agree the condition we're recommending to you tonight, that will be consistent with the timings already approved on the approved site. And that is based on the environmental health officer. And I consulted him twice actually, because of the objections, saying, is this going to be okay in terms of amenity? And they came back and said, yes, this condition is acceptable. So they're the experts in advising the council, so we've taken their view.
Thank you. Got another two questions, if I may.
Okay, does anybody, any other members wish to ask a question?
I don't mind
That's
ceding this space. Power to the units. Has any been proposed, requested, used?
Power and utilities are not normally planning matters. That's an operational matter for the applicant. Oh, I see. You mean, is there power? Oh, there's no power inside, so there can't be workshops. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, there's definitely no workshop or use. It's purely B8 storage. So there's definitely, if there was any B1 or B2 uses, that'd be immediately contravening a planning permission, and we would take action.
So we don't need to condition it because it would already be.
We don't need to condition it because it's inherent in the approved plan description. Well, the application itself, it's inherent there because it says B8 storage.
Jim,
So,
may I ask a point of information and maybe clarify what Councillor Kander is saying? What about the lighting for this area? I mean, we have dark skies issues. Is there, if I may tack onto yours, are there any external lighting for?
Yeah, it's in the report, but there's on-off security lighting, movement censored, and the ecologist has specifically looked at that because there are bats in the area, and he's happy with that.
Thank you, Councillor Kander.
Both those questions probably been more appropriately asked for the applicant, but they're actually questions that were asked at site visit. And so we were assured there was no power to the containers, and also that the lights are motion activated. So you had
in previous applications on other container sites, we also had those, and it was conditioned, but I think that's probably because they asked for a broader usage package rather than the pure B2 or whatever it is we're doing here. One last question then. Do we feel the need for a charging point, considering in other applications in rural areas, we've always tried to specify it? And I mentioned this last time because that was it was a bugbear of mine on the very first one.
Chairman, I do not see why not.
Thank you. So that
always supportive of an electric vehicle charging point.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yes, thank you. Any, sorry? Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Are there any other questions, please, for officers? Okay, thank you. So who would like to lead off the debate, please? We haven't got your copy.
It's in so many cases, in so many planning applications, I wouldn't start here. I'm not a huge fan of putting 180 or 200 containers in the middle of the countryside, but it's not a technical term, but it is what it is. And we're having to look at where we are today and going from there. I didn't see that it actually met our dark skies requirements. I'm sorry, I missed that somewhere in the report. But I'll be asking him about that, or making sure we have that condition within that. The officers have been very thorough. I'm pleasantly surprised, let's say, that we had a traffic survey. I mean, so really that, I think, nails that particular condition. As I said, the only other things I often raise this with my officer, Mr. Butler, that, because it is so sensitive site, that we must be very careful with the projection of the lighting I won't put a proposal down now because we just started, but I mean, I feel that the economic side of this needs to be considered. I think we are allowed now to include that. Until I retired a couple of years ago, I used storage areas for commercial, but also for actual domestic usage is a huge requirement. Maybe it's something to do with the sizes of the houses we actually allow being built, because people need to find to put things. Their lofts aren't quite what they used to be. So you can see I'm not 100% happy with this, but I think the officers have put in a lot of work and answered a lot of the concerns that have been raised by the complaints that we've received. So I'm happy to hear what other councillors view at the same time, please.
Councillor Pemberton.
Right, thank you very much, indeed, Chair. I agree. I share the concerns of Councillor Cottam in terms of where we are starting from. Having lots and lots of containers in the middle of the countryside isn't a great look. But Mr. Goddard is absolutely right. We're seeing more of these kind of applications come through to our planning officers and our committee as well. And actually, I think there's benefits to these types of application. We have to put to one side, I think, how we've got here. We know that the retrospective element isn't relevant in terms of our decision-making process. It's becoming clear to me that this kind of secure, sort of flexible storage, it's becoming more and more important for both residents and small businesses. And to my mind, this will provide a practical service that supports local tradespeople and households that need that kind of temporary or longer term storage space. And actually, I think there are environmental benefits too, because if you have this facility locally, it reduces the need for the users of this facility to actually travel further, which then helps unnecessary vehicle trips. We've heard from Highways about the vehicle impact study that's been done. It may not be a popular opinion, but I think what we've heard tonight is that the impact of this would be quite low. I don't think it's going to generate a lot of noise. It'll be generally quiet. There aren't that many trips in and out that I think we need to consider based on the officers and the information that the officers have given us. And I think as I see more and more of these types of application, I'm coming to the view, slowly perhaps, that actually these types of self-storage facility don't generate that much traffic and they don't produce a lot of noise. So I'm generally supportive. I do hear the concerns of those around how we've got here. And I do understand that, previously there have been objections from residents. But it doesn't seem that there's been an awful lot of objections to the activities that's taken place on the site since these containers have appeared. And, the idea that residents have complained previously, so they must still be unhappy now, I'm not sure I buy that argument. There are not many objections. There are no objectors here tonight. And if residents want to make their voice clear, they can and they do, and members know that. We've been here before. So I'm generally supportive. My inclination is to support officers' recommendations with the extra condition that's been proposed by Councillor Kando around electric charging points.
So you're making that proposal, Aidan?
I'm happy to make a proposal, Chair, but I don't want to prevent anybody else from speaking in the debate. So there's a proposal there if you want it. Thanks.
Anybody else like to speak? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that previous speakers have just said in the debate, and I am a small businessman, and I do on occasions make use of storage units. And you're right, the reason in my case is I do not have sufficient storage in where I live, and I know many other people running businesses that use the units in Reading. So it is. You're right. I went to the site visit. It's not a pretty site, but then I didn't actually see any nearby housing. Given that it's already there, I think most of the units are already being used. it is creating it's helping people, small businesses. Also, it's creating some jobs with the people providing the storage units. So I think all things considered, I would support the application.
Okay. Councillor Cotton.
With that, I'd like to propose on the basis, as we said, with adding the charging points and being reassured that the dark skies policy that we have is being respected by the lighting. I propose officer's recommendation.
And the conditions on the update sheet?
Yes.
Okay. But including the change of hours or the hours restriction?
Yes.
The change the condition. Okay, thank you. Councillor
Happy to second that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Else wants to do anything else?
Does anybody else wish to speak before we take a vote? So sorry? Sure, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to summarise the proposal and also clarify with the proposing members. So the conditions proposed would be in accordance with the details in the officer's report, in the update sheet. Also, an additional condition stating that within 2 months of the date of approval, details, including a schedule for implementation of an electric vehicle charging point, should be submitted for approval by officers. And also, Councillor Cottam, understanding your concerns in terms of dark night skies, while we do know the details of lighting that has been provided on the site, in order to formalise, I would suggest that within 2 months, a schedule of lighting shall be submitted and approved, and no other external lighting shall be developed on the site other than in accordance with that schedule.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Is that acceptable to you also, Councillor Gander? Thank you. So the proposal is, with those conditions, to approve the application. Could I have all of those in? Could all those in favour please show their hands? Good. Anybody against? Just one against. So that proposal is passed. So the application has been given, well, I should not say it's been given permission. We've delegated power to the development manager to approve the application with those conditions. Okay, thank you very much. We move on then to the next application. Thank you.
Chairman, would it be all right? Thank you.
Oh, yes, certainly. We'll take a comfort break, 10 minutes. So, will everybody be back by 22, please? Good evening, welcome back to the meeting. I'd like to move on to the next planning application, which is 25/00234, land south of the Rancher Manor Farm, Tidmarsh. Could I ask Mr. Butler, please, if he could introduce the item?
Thank you, Chairman. As you correctly said, this is for a not retrospective. It's for the proposed erection of an agricultural building on the Manor Farm at Tidmarsh. The reason for the committee is because it's called in by the ward member if the officer recommendation was to approve, which it is with permission conditions. And I'll just show you the site plan there, just so that everyone's, for those who didn't do the site visit. This is Manor Lane here in the red. The access, well, I should say that the access is actually already built, so that part's retrospective. And where the cursor is will be the agricultural barn, which is there. But just for clarity, the blue land is in the applicant's ownership, and that is the extent of the small holding there, principally to the south and southwest. So the application seeks planning permission for the erection of a 1.5-storey agricultural barn of approximately 200 square metres, 4.5 metres to the eaves and 3.3 metres to the ridge. This is the proposed, these are the proposed elevations here. It would be used for hay bale storage, principally tractor and machinery storage use, and possibly for piglet rearing to serve the small holding, which has 10 hectares of grazing land and meadow as at present. And also a small workshop is proposed. On the mezzanine floor, there would also be a small farm office plus a WC. The appearance of the building will be, as here, black timber boarding with dark metallic roof. So it's essentially agricultural in appearance, although, yes, it's agricultural in appearance. Just to stress, the original application had proposals which were, shall I say, more domestic in appearance, which we were not content with. And through amendments, we arrived at these proposed elevations, which we are now considering. So the previous plans, which are being reconsulted on, are not part of the application. So just to stress, if you do approve this permission tonight, this application tonight, it will relate to these proposed elevations. Just for clarity, the whole of the holding is 13 hectares, but only 10 hectares is agricultural per se, because the rest comprises woodland and a yard to the south. And for those of you who didn't do the site visit, it was actually a very useful site visit because we walked down to this area here where there are existing barns in commercial use, some authorised, some not. And the objections of Tidmarsh Parish Council are pertinent because they do relate to this area and why these barns cannot be used for agricultural use. And also this access here, why that cannot be used off the A340 as opposed to Manor Farm Lane. That is looked at later in the report. Moving to page 28. I'll mention this because it was mentioned in the report, although I don't wish to make too much of a highlight of it, bearing in mind that any permission granted is not personal to the applicant, but it is to the land use, the land on the site per se. But I mentioned it because it was noted in the original application supporting material that the applicant has apparently autistic tendencies. And while this is noted, this should have nil bearing on the consideration of the application, since any planning permission granted will not be paid to the applicant. In terms of listed buildings, there are a number of listed buildings not in the immediate vicinity of the agricultural barn, but some in Tidmarsh to the north. members need to take that into account, but we consider as officers that the visual impact on any setting of those listed buildings will be minimal. There are no conservation areas, but the whole of the application site lies within the North Wessex Downs NDL, excuse me, which was the A and B. In terms of consultations, Tidmarsh Parish Council have put in a strong objection to the application. I won't read that in detail, it's set out on the agenda report, but they are particularly concerned for a range of reasons why this application should not proceed. However, all the other technical consultees, highways, environmental health, SUDS, archaeologists and council ecologists have no objections to the application, subject to appropriate conditions being applied. In terms of public representations, the council has received objections from 8 contributors, all of which object to the proposal on the grounds set out in the report. And I should add, following the amendments, that there were 3 additional objections, but they came from the same objectors. So although one could argue there are 11 in total, it's still 8 objectors. Just to clarify that point, that's important. Moving on to the planning appraisal of the application, the principle of development. Policy SP1 in your local plan review, as adopted, makes it absolutely clear that bona fide new agricultural development in the countryside is clearly accepted on agricultural small holdings or large holdings, whatever, in order to sustain the rural economy and, of course, to sustain local food production. So there's no question at all that the principle of this agricultural barn, if it's permitted, is accepted. And this indeed has been supported by a specific agricultural appraisal which officers requested the applicant to publish or produce. It's been on the website for some months now by RAC, who confirmed that although the small holding is relatively small, the proposed barn is commensurate with the requirements of that land holding. And therefore, we as officers, for the reasons set out in the report, consider that policy DM35 is satisfied. I'm happy to answer any questions on that, but the criteria are gone through in some detail, and we are satisfied that those matters are on balance. Well, no, not on balance, they are acceptable. One thing we also stress is that because the new building is within the North Wessex Downs NDL, it is clearly very important to consider any detrimental visual impact on the wider landscape. Officers do not resile from the fact that inevitably, because it's a new built form, there will be a degree of visual harm arising from the barn, although of course a barn is appropriate to see in the countryside. So there will be some impact on the NDL. However, we do not consider that visual impact merits refusal of the scheme. And in that respect, we did ask for an LVIA, which, sorry for the acronym, that is a landscape and visual impact assessment, which the applicants have produced. This is one of the reasons why the application's taken a long time to get to committee. And we are satisfied as officers, after having examined that LVIA, that the development is acceptable in what was the A and B. So accordingly, it complies with policy SP2 in the LPR. I've mentioned the agricultural appraisal. My colleague, Mr. Goddard, can obviously answer any questions about the access, but highways have not objected to Manor Farm Lane being utilised for the access to the north. It may, in fact, have been better to use the access to the south, but what we as officers have to consider is whether this existing application is acceptable on its own merits, not what might be a possible alternative scheme. So access is acceptable because the traffic generation will be relatively very low. Paragraph 6.8 sets out the town parish council representations, which of course are legitimate. They have two principal points of concern. One is the access, and the other is in their view, the lack of the clear agricultural and landscape justification for the proposal. However, in the planning balance and conclusion, we consider that the application is acceptable. But before I move further on, I'll just, for those of you who didn't attend the site visit, we were very fortunate with the weather, with the photographs. And so looking southwest from the site, this is what you would see. Looking west on rising ground, there's mature vegetation, rising ground. This is the retrospective access to Manor Farm Lane looking north, which will be approved if you approve it. This is the current office unit, porter cabin welfare unit on site. This is unauthorised, and if this application is approved, there is a condition on the report that says it must be removed within 2 months of the completion of the agricultural unit, and we will be ensuring that that is monitored. This is the screening around the site looking to, I believe this is to the southeast. This is the access road to the south, and you can just make out the barns I mentioned earlier on further to the south. This is looking west up the hill, and that's basically it. So before I come to the final recommendation, Chairman, draw your attention to the update sheet. Please ignore point 3, because in fact, the blue and the red line plan can be submitted because it was submitted originally, so please ignore that point. In the updated recommendation, I've already mentioned the additional condition about the removal of the porter cabin. So on balance, and in the conclusion, Chairman, we are recommending the grant of planning permission with the conditions set out on the agenda report. I would stress, because there are some local concerns about whether this barn may in the future be used for some sort of quasi-residential use. If that does happen, we would, of course, take enforcement action. But just for belt and braces, we are proposing condition 9, use of the barn. No residential use as habitable accommodation, I can't say it, of the barn hereby permitted shall occur at any time in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Goddard, are there any highways comments, please?
Thank you, Chairman. No highway comments. The site is part of the wider farm complex, and we would expect such activities to already be going on within the complex. So we're not expecting overall on the highway network any increase in traffic. So no objection is raised. Thank you.
Thank you. And move on then to speakers. Mr. Mather or Mather? Sorry, would you like to come to the rostrum, please? And you have 5 minutes to address the committee. And could you remain there when you finish, please, for if members wish to answer any questions? Thank you.
Of course. Hello, is that working? Hello. Good evening. My name is Edward Mather from Colony Architects, and I'm here to speak as the agent for the application. To say thank you to Michael for his great work on this application. And I'm really here just to sort of outline a summary of why the applicant is seeking consent for this barn and to answer any questions. I'm just going to quickly run through the sort of pertinent points. So it's obviously a modest agricultural barn to serve the existing 32 acres and actively manage the land at Manor Farm. The proposal will create storage for hay, seed, fertiliser, machinery, a small welfare space. The applicant who doesn't live on the site or nearby can manage and look after his land holding. There's currently no suitable existing buildings on site, save for the temporary structure, which will be removed when if the scheme's approved and thereby implemented. In respect to scale and design, the building is, as set out in the agricultural statement, at an absolutely minimal size required to support the holding and land. And that's quite well set out in a very figurative way, so it's should support that. It's traditionally clad in timber with recessive tones and a sympathetic style to suit the character of the area, and a low profile roof and a thinner edge to put the open three-sided hay barn storage in there. And it's effectively settled in the lowest part of the site, so nestled around three sides of trees, well away from any residential buildings. And effectively, this is supported in the LVIA, whereby it's the concluding point of the LVIA says it's extremely limited in its impact, even in winter, owing to the trees in the landform. It is adjacent to the settlement boundary, so it's not wholly in the middle of the countryside, as it were. From a highways perspective, it shouldn't increase traffic at all. The operation exists as it already does, so there's no harm there. And there was no technical objections raised to that point. Obviously, this is to enhance the kind of existing activities on site and therefore be an improvement to the sort of rural enterprise of this land. The applicant has aspirations for some piglets. We're having conversations about rearing some lambs, some bees. There's all sorts of interesting rural activities that he'd like to undertake, and that's what this will support. So overall, this is a well-considered, proportionate agricultural building that enables proper management of the holding and brings tidiness to the operations at this land. I guess if you've got any further questions, happy to answer.
Thank you. Do members have any questions, please? Councillor Mays.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Mather, you've mentioned there's going to be a small pig operation.
6 pigs, perhaps.
Sorry?
6 pigs, perhaps.
So they're actual, not in chicken type.
Oh no,
units. It's just free.
Yeah, it's yes, it's a small
free range.
Yeah. It's not. We're not talking huge
areas.
Battery farm.
No, okay.
No.
Battery pigs.
The battery pigs, yes. Battery powered pigs. Yeah.
Okay. On the drawing and the design, the plans show that the centre is double height, whereas the drawings that show the elevations show that there is a continuous ridge like this drawing. The ridge
correct.
Is the same height, the full width.
The central part of the barn is a void, essentially. So you've got taller machinery, tractors, that sort of stuff in the middle. Whereas there's a lowered ceiling level where the welfare and fertiliser and stores are either side of that central taller space, basically.
Okay.
Yep. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I think you mentioned that there wouldn't be any or very little additional traffic arising from this. Can you clarify, is there any existing agricultural activity going on in this particular piece of land?
In previous years, there has been a sort of local farmer who has been managing the land with taking hay on a sort of twice yearly basis. And he's recently not carrying on with his activities. So the storage of the machine is held off site effectively. Mr. McCarthy, the applicant, is wishing to continue that. So he needs the facilities here to store that alongside other small holding operations such as the pigs we've talked about. So that's effectively why this has become a need.
Okay. I mean, I don't quite, I would have thought from the way this has been described, this is going to be increasing it sounds like there's very limited agricultural activity. There's going to be haymaking, there's going to be presumably vehicles coming in and out to collect the hay.
There's no change in activity on the site. There's, say, 2 crops of hay a year, plus other small sort of livestock activities. If you look, the agricultural report sets out quite clearly the precise machinery required, and there's even calculations in terms of exactly how much hay is produced to the cubic meter, that it actually fits precisely in the hay store area, etc. So it's actually thoroughly rationalised based on previous use and then therefore the future use.
Okay.
Councillor Kander.
This is a question I'm going to ask the officers, but I might need to ask the agent here, and what I don't want to do is not ask him and then not be able to ask him once he's stepped away from the podium.
I'll only be there.
So if it's not appropriate, then just say and I'll ask it later.
Okay.
I'm a little confused in terms of, are you planning to sell hay on a retail basis from this? Because there seems to be some objection in the report.
We're not going to have a full sale sign with hay at the front door. It's more, there'll be perhaps some local equestrian landowners nearby that will buy the hay off us, which is previously the hay's been going, essentially.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on then to questions for officers. Anybody like to? Councillor Kanda. Oh.
Chairman, the ward member.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor. Having sat through all that time, I apologise profusely.
Not at all, thank you.
Councillor Shakespeare.
Thank you.
And you also have 5 minutes, and if you could, do you want a 1 minute warning or?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to last that long, but if I get close, and please, I'd appreciate it.
And if you can remain there in case there's any questions from members when you're finished, please.
Of course.
Thank you.
I'm here tonight to represent several Tidmarsh residents who wrote to me claiming they were too scared to publicly oppose this application after opposition to previous applications on the Manor Farm site was met with abuse and intimidation. And this is going back a number of years. In their objection, Tidmarsh and Sutton Parish Council notes that the original permission granted for the porter cabin on Manor Farm was for it to serve as a temporary welfare unit during the construction of 2, which later became 4, residential rental properties. The welfare unit was then to be removed and the ground returned to its natural state. Subsequently, as we saw, the welfare unit was placed on a substantial reinforced concrete base, and instead of being used for the welfare of constructors, became used as an office for the landowner, which it has been for some time. The demolition and replacement of the rancher hasn't yet commenced. There's a long history of applications on the Manor Farm site with, as mentioned, a number of retrospective applications to expand the original approved buildings. The council's been pursuing planning enforcement action against a temporary building on the site for a number of years. Unfortunately, this building burned to the ground the day before the last enforcement notice could be served. Until the current owner bought the site, there was no need for any building to manage this site, which at the moment has absolutely no operations at all on it. The proposed building has 80 square metres of living room or offices, including a kitchen, as well as 3 bathrooms. Externally, there's a balcony and a 75-metre square loggia overlooking the woods. It's a very peaceful and pleasant location. However, despite these very desirable characteristics, the original application form states its purpose was to store 3 tractors. Afterwards, the agricultural consultants were called in, and the report explained in more detail how this building could be used in an agricultural context. The application now has listed this to make it just 1 tractor and a bunch of other very expensive agricultural equipment, and that equipment will be used to make 2,500 bales of hay. Now, that hay has a retail value of around £12,000, just £12,000. Until now, this hay has been harvested in 1 day by a contractor, but now we're proposing a building to store this equipment for very valuable equipment for the rest of the year. The application form states that there's no one employed on the site and that no additional jobs will be created. Yet we've had this large office for running what is actually listed as a retail business, for hay retail business. Many residents have expressed uncertainty over the future of this building and what it's actually going to be used for, as a proposal doesn't seem to be a viable business. The applicant is a very accomplished property businessman, and so many residents are very surprised that such an investment is being made for such a return. The form also states that there's no other agricultural buildings on the site, but there are former agricultural buildings near the historic entrance to this land. And the entrance, has sufficient thought been given to converting these to fulfil the guidance in the NPPF paragraph 88 and the embodied energy they represent? This additional application marks overdevelopment, with there being yet more buildings being erected on what's a very modest site. And buildings have already been developed for housing and for waste management purposes on this site. The entrance to the land, as we saw in the plan, has always been through the driveway to the existing farm buildings. And the entrance onto Manor Lane was only broken through in the last 2 years, and only walled in and gated in the last 12 months. And we saw the very grand drive that's been put there with retrospective planning permissions being sought for. The proposal will result in an increase in traffic along Manor Farm Lane, as vehicles, trucks, lorries, horse boxes will be arriving and leaving Manor Farm via Manor Farm Lane and trying to navigate their way out onto the busy A340. If the application is approved, should movement on and off this site be through the historic access?
You have 1 minute, Councillor Shakespeare.
Some months ago, a very well attended public meeting was held in Titchmarsh Village Hall to discuss the applicant's master plan for this land. The meeting concluded with a show of hands, which overwhelmingly rejected the proposals. The applicant responded by saying if he wanted, he could turn the site into a plant storage yard, and who would stop him? A voice from the back of the hall called out, West Berkshire Council will. Thank you.
So, Councillor Shakespeare, would you like to just remain in case there's any? Sorry. Are there any questions, please, for the local councillor? Councillor Cottam.
Do you say there was a recent change in ownership of the property?
I'm not certain. It's 3 or 4 years ago, I believe, the applicant built the property.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Chairman, with Simon's agreement, can I just make a comment there?
Certainly.
Just in response to that, I think as case officer this application, as the planning officer, along with Simon, advising the committee as part of the local planning authority, notwithstanding the comments you've heard from the ward member, you need to be extremely careful in determining this application that you look at the merits of the planning application, not the merits of the applicant. If this permission is granted tonight, if it may not be, the applicant is well within his rights, and he may sell the site tomorrow. He may sell it in 2 months. He may sell it in 2 years. The enforcement history is potentially, or can be in some circumstances, a material planning consideration. But in this case, we have taken into account as officers, we have looked carefully at the land use merits of this application, and we are recommending approval. Of course, you can, of course, refuse the application, but you must not refuse the application on the personal demerits or merits of the applicant, because if you were to do so in a public meeting, you could then be, and we all know this is being live streamed, quite properly criticised on that ground. You must look at the land use merits.
May I just counter retort on that?
Perhaps you'd like to bring that up in questions to officers.
Well, maybe I can ask questions.
Do you have a question for Councillor Shakespeare?
It puts us in a very difficult position here, because I was asking a specific question for trying to understand the applicant's knowledge of the site, why they needed it. They were asking for this particular size of building. It wasn't because of some personal issue. They are totally devoid of that. I'd just like to make that very, very clear. I was asking because I wanted to understand how they arrived at the application that they have, and that it's realistic in terms of I believe, and maybe Mr. Till can correct me or not, that we look at economics in terms of some of this. That can be left for a later moment, but I do feel, I'm not saying about the applicant, okay? So I don't want this live streamed to hoist me up my own cart.
Councillor Cottam, yes, we are still at...
Yeah. Chairman, please just
yes, you may.
Chairman, members, thank you very much. Mr. Butler was perhaps slightly prematurely counselling members in terms of how they should look at the application. There was no intention to interfere with members' questions to the ward member. And to interrogate the ward member on the matters pertinent to their consideration of the application as they must. I think Mr. Butler was simply concerned that the direction of questioning could take members to a personal level regarding the applicant. But with that note of caution, please do carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. I was not questioning the officer's experience, which I know goes back in over long years, so there's nothing on a personal basis. I'm just saying the issues seem to be confused. Thank you.
Yes. Are there any other questions for the local council, please? No, thank you very much, Councillor Shakespeare. So now could we move on, please, to questions for officers? Councillor McCann.
Yes, the application says that they may be raising pigs, littering. I don't know how often pigs have piglets. But if you're going to put a condition in that says you cannot live there, according to the 2006 Animal Welfare Act, there needs to be 24-hour to 48-hour care provided for that, which then would breach or potentially breach this. Now, I don't know how often pigs have piglets, it may be every 3 months, maybe once a year, I don't know. But it would seem if it's going to be a farm, there should be quite a few pigs, and therefore you're unlikely to breach the 24-hour care, 48-hour care for when these piglets are born. So this question to explain how will that work?
I think the gestation period of pigs is somewhat similar to humans, but I'm not absolutely sure.
Notwithstanding questions about the biology of pigs, which I have to say I'm no expert on either, Chairman. The occupation of a building for residential purposes is different to use of a building for a temporary period for activities that are ancillary to the business on the site. And that is a matter of fact and degree. So if somebody said, I need to be on this building for a week and a half because it's time for the pigs to give birth, I need to be on site for medical veterinary reasons for 24 hours, that in itself would not be a breach of condition. It would be down to the reasons for the occupation being suitable to be ancillary to the activities on site. Occupation as a residential dwelling is 24/7 activities of a residential nature taking place throughout the year. And there's a well-established set of tests within planning law in terms of how a person would go about evidencing a change of use in that manner. So that level of ancillary residential use, which would be completely associated with the business, wouldn't be something that would trouble an enforcement officer in going about enforcing that condition.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Thank you. Any other questions from Councillor Kanda?
To the officers, right?
Yes.
Just back to the question I raised with the applicant's agent about the buying and selling, or well, not the buying and the selling of hay. Would small amount of selling to equestrian centres or people constitute a retail business, and in which case should the application be a retail application?
Thank you, Councillor Kanda. It's a good question. In all likelihood, the nature of sale, which would be secured by, typically somebody word of mouth or telephone, there's hay available here, I need some for my farm, I'll come and pick it up. That kind of operation would not be a traditional retail operation. It would be another ancillary activity associated with baling hay on a site. And it would be a very typical activity for a rural business, a farm in operation on a site such as this. So given that that is the detail that we have been provided with in the agricultural consultants report, and we know that historically hay baleage has been a primary use of this site in its less intense use over recent years. We're satisfied as officers that the use wouldn't be a retail use, it would be an ancillary agricultural use.
Thank you. Any other questions for officers? Sorry. Okay, then so we move on to debate. Who would like to lead off on the debate? Councillor Cotton.
Yeah. For clarification, and it could be confusing. I mean, I do have some agricultural knowledge. For example, assisting on the important issue of pigs, they normally buy the piglets in and raise them. These are basically sourced elsewhere, so they wouldn't. So they just purchase, say, half a dozen piglets. They bring them and then they raise them. They don't actually. It's a separate business almost to the raising of the actual pigs themselves. My concern is, and I think it is, the economic viability of the use of this building. And it started off with 3 tractors. Now it's gone down to 1 tractor. Would that 1 tractor be needed? Is it economically viable to buy a tractor at £250,000 to actually, for one week's operation? Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my limited understanding is that we are allowed to take into consideration some of the economic effects or viability of. May I ask you through you, Chairman, Mr. Till, if that's the case? Is that something we can take into account? If not, I'll withdraw it.
Thank you, Chairman. Members should absolutely consider whether the details they've been presented with indicate that the building would be necessary to assist with viable operation of a farm business. What members should not take account of is the business practices that may or may not be employed by the applicant. So in terms of their decision to buy a tractor, perhaps they may rent a tractor. Perhaps they might borrow a tractor. That isn't a matter for material planning consideration. It's only whether there will be a necessity to provide tractor storage for the operations that are proposed on the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
My understanding is that there's been a viability report that we've accepted.
Yeah, maybe we could ask a little bit more about that.
Any other questions? Sorry, we're into debate now, aren't we? Would anybody else like to speak in the debate? Councillor Kander.
So am I in a Richard Sumner to play off my colleague over? I'll be quite honest, I find this very simple. It's given we should only look at the planning application in and of itself and not question either previous actions, financial viability, etc. Because for all we know, it's just somebody who has a tractor fetish, right? And they just want to store one in a thing and they'll use it once a year. We can't think about those things. So if you just look at the black and white of the scenario, I find this a very simple one, and I understand the reasons why it's within committee because of the call-ins, etc. But had it not been a call-in, it wouldn't have even hit this committee, I don't think, or probably not. So from my perspective, I think it's a farm. They clearly have use for things. How much of that use, we don't know, but it's a farm and it has use for these things. They're not asking to store classic cars or something, which might prove a different argumentation. So from my perspective, I see no reason not to support this. So I'm just throwing it out there, that's all.
Anybody else? Councillor Pemberton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I'm pretty much at the same point as Councillor Kander. I am grateful to the ward member for bringing this to committee tonight. It's their job to obviously amplify the voices of their residents, and I do understand those concerns. I understand the history of the site and some of the things that have gone on. I think lost in a lot of the noise around what's the barn going to be used for? How will it be enforced? What's going to be stored in there? We haven't discussed very much about the impact of this structure on the character of the wider setting and the landscape. And I have to be honest, I was earlier today when I was reading the landscape and visual impact assessment, compared to some LVIAs that I've read, it was pretty good. It was pretty comprehensive. There was a lot of useful information in there. And I'm picking out a couple as I'm kind of reading it now. When I look at the impacts, they're minimal. The landscape has a high capacity to absorb the new barn due to its low elevation. We've talked about the surrounding woodland enclosure. There doesn't appear to be any issue with the barn's scale, its height, or its appearance. There's negligible impact on the character of the wider area. There's nothing in here that worries me. And if I kind of reverse engineer the argument and think about how we would approach this application from a planning perspective, Councillor Cander's right. It does seem relatively straightforward. The principle of development is agreed. There's no other issue with it. I can't see a reason to refuse it. Noting the ward members' concerns, we are where we are.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, I mean, I think I've come to the same conclusion as the last two speakers. Though this afternoon, when I read through I looked at the objectors' comments on the portal, which aren't all contained in here, and I must admit I was quite disturbed when I read some of the wording there. But I appreciate the advice we've been given that this isn't really anything to do with with the character, shall we say, of the applicant. For example, I don't think that the property is going to have a, it looks okay to me, given it's a barn in an agricultural rural setting. So in that respect, I don't have a problem with it. I do have some sympathy with I didn't realise there'd been a public meeting, for example, and the fact that people turned up, that fears were expressed. That does influence me to some extent, but I think on balance, I will support the application. Approval of the application.
Anybody else like to speak? In that case, could somebody make a proposal, please? Councillor Pemberton.
Propose we go with officers' recommendations.
With the condition on the
condition on the update sheet. Yeah.
Okay. Does that find a second? Councillor Kander.
Yeah, second.
We have a proposal to accept officers' recommendation with the additional condition on the update sheet. And that will be to give conditional to give the development manager delegated power to approve the application with those conditions. Could I have all those in favour, please? Anybody against? Any abstention? That's just the one abstention. Thank you very much. So that application, so we've given delegated power to the development manager to approve the application with the conditions in the agenda, with the additional condition on the update sheet. Okay. Thank you very much. So that concludes the business this evening. So I'll close the meeting and thank you all for your attendance for a very civilised discussion. Thank you.